My name is Emily Carter. I'm 28 years old, and just a few months ago, I was standing on the graduation stage at the University of Washington, accepting my master's degree in business administration to the applause of friends and peers. It should have been one of the proudest days of my life, a milestone I had spent nearly 10 years studying and working relentlessly to reach. But like every other major milestone before it, that moment felt incomplete, or more precisely, it lacked the people I should have been able to call my family. From the time I was young, I understood exactly where I stood in our home. I was the one who compromised, the one who gave things up to maintain harmony, the one constantly measured against Ashley. My sister, 3 years younger, and the golden child in our parents' eyes. Richard and Linda Carter, my parents, live in a quiet coastal town in Oregon, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and gossip can sweep through every cafe in a single morning. To the neighbors, we looked like the perfect family. My father owned a long-established hardware store. My mother worked at the city library, and my sister and I were raised in a 2-story wooden house with flowers hanging from the balcony and Christmas lights still glowing well into February. But what the neighbors never saw was the clear imbalance in how my parents treated me compared to Ashley. Ashley was the long-awaited child, adored and sheltered, as though the world might shatter her at any moment. When Ashley wanted to take dance lessons, my parents immediately hired a private instructor. When she said she wanted to travel to Europe to expand her horizons, they bought the plane tickets without a second thought. And me, I was taught that money was difficult to earn, that independence was necessary to truly value things, that you couldn't always depend on your parents. So, from the age of 16, I worked evening shifts at a roadside cafe, saving every dollar for books and tuition, while Ashley never had to question where her next meal would come from. I used to believe this was simply a difference in parenting styles, that my parents were trying to make me stronger. But over time, I understood that this favoritism wasn't some thoughtful parenting plan. It was a choice, and it was never a choice that favored me. I still remember my undergraduate graduation day. My parents arrived nearly an hour late because they had taken Ashley shopping for her performance costume. And when I received my first diploma, they snapped a few quick photos and left before the ceremony had even finished. The day I told them I had been accepted into the MBA program at the University of Washington, my father merely nodded and said, "Good, but don't expect us to help with the money." So I did exactly what they told me. I handled everything on my own. I applied for scholarships, worked part-time, took on additional marketing consulting projects for small businesses, and spent 2 full years balancing a full-time course load with over 40 hours of work every week. On graduation day, I knew they wouldn't be there. And just as I expected, the seats reserved for my family remained empty. But right after the ceremony, as I was taking photos with friends on the lawn in front of the main building, I received an unexpected call from my maternal grandparents' attorney. The deep, steady voice of Mr. Samuel Pierce, their longtime lawyer, came through the line. "Emily, your grandparents left their entire estate to you. We need to meet to discuss the details." I froze, not because of the money, since I didn't even know the amount yet, but because I had never realized my grandparents trusted and loved me that deeply. My maternal grandparents, Harold and Margaret Lewis, were the ones who nurtured the best parts of who I am. Their old seaside home with red brick walls, a wide porch overlooking the ocean, and a rose garden that bloomed beautifully every summer was where I would go whenever I felt lost. They lived simply but with intention, spending most of their days reading, gardening, and telling me stories about their youth in the early 1950s, back when the town was still a small fishing village. When I was in high school, I spent nearly every weekend there, helping my grandfather repair fences, baking apple pies with my grandmother, and most importantly, listening. It was something I rarely had the chance to do in my own home. In their final years, as their health began to fail, I was the one driving them to doctor's appointments, managing their banking, paying their bills, and tending to every small detail of their care. My parents and Ashley rarely appeared, except around Thanksgiving or Christmas, and even then it was usually just long enough to take a few. photos for social media. So when Mr. Samuel told me they had left everything to me, I knew it wasn't random or favoritism. It was acknowledgement. A few days later, sitting in Mr. Samuel's warm, wood-paneled office in the center of town, he placed a thick folder in front of me and said, "Your grandparents' current estate value is about $1 million, including the old house and their financial investments. They want you to have full control." I sat there in silence, feeling a rush of emotions, gratitude, deep affection, and a faint edge of unease. When I left his office that day, I drove along the coastal road back to Seattle, the ocean's salty wind tangling with my thoughts. $1 million sounded unreal, like something pulled from a fairy tale. But I knew the true value wasn't just the money or the property. It was the years of memories, the sunlit mornings on that red brick porch, the smell of my grandmother's coffee, and my grandfather's quiet chuckle as he read the morning paper. And because I understood that, I also knew this wouldn't stay a fairy tale for long. In my family, anything valuable quickly became a target. My parents had a long habit of borrowing money or belongings with promises to return them, only for both the item and the promise to quietly vanish. I still remember when I was a college freshman and my aunt gave them a large sum of money to invest in my father's store. 6 months later, the store looked the same, the money was gone, and whenever my aunt asked about it, my mother skillfully changed the subject or scolded her for making such a big deal about money within the family. With Ashley, it was different. My parents never needed to borrow from her because, in their minds, everything already belonged to her. From her first car, to her trip to Europe, to the small apartment in Portland they bought as an investment, but ultimately let her live in rent-free, it all happened without anyone else's input. That's why the moment I signed the inheritance documents with Mr. Samuel, I knew I had to act first. I couldn't wait until they found out and then try to protect it afterward. By then, it would be too late. I contacted an old friend from law school who now worked at a major real estate firm in Seattle, and she introduced me to an attorney named Daniel Hart, a man in his 40s who spoke softly but noticed everything. We met at a small cafe near Capitol Hill, where he spread my file across the table, flipped through each page, and nodded. "Emily, I've handled many inheritance disputes, and if your family history is what you've described, you need to secure these assets immediately. The best option is an irrevocable trust," he said, his tone calm but firm. He explained that an irrevocable trust, once created, couldn't be changed or revoked unilaterally, with the assets fully separated from personal ownership. I would be the trustee, the only one authorized to manage and decide how the trust operated, but legally, the assets would no longer be in my name. Anyone searching public records would find no link between me and the house or the investments. I agreed instantly, and over the next 3 weeks, we worked nonstop. Daniel coordinated with an asset management company to form an LLC owned by the trust, and all utility accounts for the house, electricity, water, taxes, insurance, were transferred into the company's name. The property title was updated, stamped, and secured in the law firm's safe, with copies stored at a bank in Seattle, far from the coastal town where my parents might ever stumble upon them. My grandparents' bank accounts were closed, and all funds were moved into a new trust-owned account protected by two-factor authentication, accessible only to me and Daniel. I remember clearly the moment I signed the final document, placing my pen beneath the words, "Irrevocable Living Trust Agreement." It felt like a blend of relief and alertness, like locking the final door between myself and the hands that had taken so much from me before. I told no one, not even my closest friends. When my parents called to ask, "When are you moving into your grandparents' house?" in a tone that was half concern, half investigation, I simply smiled and told them I was still busy in Seattle. When Ashley texted, "Have you thought about selling the house and splitting the money? I need capital to open a nail salon with my friend," I replied with a single word, "No." I let them believe I hadn't done anything, that everything remained untouched, so they would stay comfortable and continue underestimating me, just as they always had. In the weeks that followed, I went on with my life as usual, still commuting back to town on weekends to check on the house, mow the lawn, and water the roses my grandmother once cared for. Every time I stepped inside that house, I felt a sense of calm, but there was always a quiet warning echoing in my mind. They will come, sooner or later. And because of that, I guarded my secret even more carefully. I instructed Daniel to make sure no one but me would receive any notifications or correspondence related to the trust. Every bill was paid online, leaving no paper trail behind. I even installed a discreet security camera system, hidden from plain sight, so that if anyone showed up unexpectedly, I would know immediately. Once everything was finalized, I felt like I could finally breathe. I had built a strong legal barrier around my grandparents' assets, one my parents and Ashley couldn't tear down with forged paperwork or emotional stories. But I also knew that for people like them, a wall only made them want to climb higher or dig deeper. And when that moment arrived, I would be ready. In the first few months after everything had been fully transferred into the trust, things were strangely quiet. No frantic calls, no dramatic text messages full of exclamation points, no surprise visits to my grandparents' house under the excuse of just passing through. But that silence didn't comfort me. If anything, it felt like a still lake where I knew unseen currents were moving beneath the surface. During our brief phone calls, my mother would occasionally drop comments that sounded casual but carried weight beneath them. It would only be fair if your grandparents left the house to both you and your sister. Or, Ashley has so many memories there too. You should think about sharing so she doesn't feel left out. I would offer a faint smile and a non-committal, neither confirming nor denying, letting them read into my silence however they wanted. Ashley was more calculated. She began stopping by for seemingly innocent reasons, bringing cookies Mom had baked, returning items Mom said she'd left at Grandma and Grandpa's, or claiming she was just passing through on her way back from Portland. But each time, Ashley's eyes never really settled on my face. They wandered over the bookshelves, the wall with my grandparents' photo, and especially the wooden cabinet where I kept papers that meant nothing to me, but could mean everything to someone searching for proof of ownership. I never left her alone in the living room, and whenever she casually asked, "Do you still have the house papers? I just want to look at them for fun," I would smile and redirect the conversation as if I hadn't heard her at all. My parents changed too. After years of near indifference, they suddenly showed an unusual interest in me. One Friday evening, I received an invitation to come home for dinner, my mother adding pointedly, "We need to have a family talk. Nothing is more important than this." When I arrived, the meal was far more elaborate than usual. Roast meat, wine, freshly baked apple pie. Throughout dinner, the conversation circled phrases like managing the inheritance together, honoring your grandparents' legacy, and making sure everyone benefits equally. They never said it outright, but every word was designed to remind me that, in their eyes, my grandparents' house and assets were not mine alone. They were family property. I nodded, smiled when appropriate, neither refusing nor agreeing, allowing them to believe I had made no legal preparations, that I was still the compliant daughter who could be guided wherever they wanted. At other times, my father would call with an unusually upbeat tone, asking whether I needed help maintaining the house, saying he knew some workers who could fix the roof, repaint the porch, or inspect the wiring for safety. I knew it was only an excuse to get people inside, and I always declined politely, explaining that I was learning more about property management and wanted to handle it myself. He would pause for a moment, then shift his tone, half joking and half serious. "Just worried you won't be able to hold on to it, and then you'll have to call us," he'd say. I would answer with a light laugh, never rising to the bait. During that period, I began watching them more carefully. I noticed Ashley posting vague updates on social media about fairness and sharing within families, sometimes paired with photos of my grandparents' house taken from a distance, clearly during her drop-by visits. My parents, meanwhile, started reconnecting with relatives they hadn't spoken to in years, quietly building a network of support. An aunt mentioned to me that my mother had been telling people, "Emily's young. She needs guidance so she doesn't waste what her grandparents left her." Slowly, everything formed a clear picture. They were preparing for something big, but they weren't ready to make their move yet. I kept my routine exactly the same, still visiting my grandparents' house every weekend to tend the garden and clean inside, still working steadily in Seattle. But in my mind, I knew this was only the calm before the storm. They needed time to find a legal angle, or at least a convincing story that would win sympathy from others, and I needed that same time to observe, to memorize every look, every careless remark, every subtle gesture that might be part of a larger plan. My silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. I let them believe I wasn't on guard, that I was still the same Emily from years ago, the girl too buried in her studies to think about protecting her own interests, because when they believed the prey was standing still, they would come closer, and that was exactly where I wanted them. That morning, the coastal town sat beneath a thin veil of clouds, weak sunlight spilling across the front yard and catching on scattered red and gold maple leaves along the stone walkway. I wore a gray sweater, broom in hand, slowly sweeping the leaves into a corner while listening to the distant crash of waves, the salty edge of the morning breeze, mixed with the cries of seagulls and the soft rustle of leaves, made everything feel strangely peaceful, until the low hum of an engine shattered it. A familiar black SUV turned into the driveway, its tires crunching against the gravel. I recognized it instantly. It was my parents' car. Before I could even question why they were there, the passenger door opened and Ashley stepped out, her golden hair neatly tied back, her face glowing as if she'd just achieved something extraordinary. My mother followed, carrying a slim folder in her hands, while my father climbed slowly from the driver's seat, wearing that smile I knew too well, the one he used right before making an important announcement. Ashley spoke first. "Hey, sis," she said brightly, walking toward me as if we were about to share wonderful news. "This house is in my name now. Mom and Dad want you to move out this week so I can renovate and sell it. I already have a potential buyer." The words rushed out without pause, as though the decision had been made long ago, and I was merely being notified. I tightened my grip on the broom handle, feeling the cool, damp wood against my palms, but kept my expression calm. My father stepped forward, holding out a stack of papers stamped with blue ink, pushing them toward me as he spoke. "We've been working with a lawyer. It turns out in your grandparents' will, there was a section that wasn't updated after your grandmother passed. Technically, the house should belong to both you and your sister, but your grandfather accidentally left that part out. We corrected the mistake and transferred ownership to Ashley so it's easier to manage. You already have somewhere to live, don't you? This is the most reasonable solution." My mother stood beside him, nodding in agreement, her eyes carrying that familiar look that said, "This is for everyone's good." I studied the stack of papers, noticing the pages printed from an unofficial source, the seal that looked questionably fake, the uneven signatures, and above all, the confidence with which they presented it to me, as if I would simply bow my head and agree. Inside, I almost laughed, but outwardly, I only tilted my head slightly and let a thin smile form on my lips. "Really?" I asked slowly, my voice holding no hint of shock, more like a casual remark on something mildly interesting. Ashley blinked, clearly unsettled by how calm I was. "Yes, really. You don't need to worry. I'll make sure everything is handled quickly. I think you can have all your things moved out within a week. I'll hire people to clear the place for renovation. Everything will go smoothly." Her voice carried a note of excitement, as if she had been waiting for this moment for years. My father stepped in, lowering his voice as though to comfort me. "Emily, you know this house needs constant upkeep, and Ashley has both the time and a clear plan. You're busy with work in Seattle. Holding on to this place will only become a burden. This is the best option for everyone. Besides," my mother added, "Ashley will share part of the sale with you, won't you, Ashley?" Ashley nodded quickly, her eyes flashing with the certainty of victory. I said nothing. I let the silence stretch just long enough for them to believe I was truly considering their offer, when in reality I had envisioned this exact moment months ago. I knew every move they would make. I knew they would arrive with a story that was half truth and half invention. I knew they would bring documents they believed were enough to force me out. And I also knew that today was not the moment to reveal everything. Instead of arguing, I leaned the broom against the porch wall, wiped my hands on my jeans, and spoke evenly. "I've heard you." I didn't call them mom, dad, or sister, and that small detail made Ashley's brow crease, even as she kept smiling. "Good," she said, sounding relieved. "Then we'll be back soon to get started. I'll call the moving company today." My father folded the papers and slipped them back into his jacket pocket, as though the matter had already been resolved. They left after a few stiff pleasantries, the SUV rolling down the driveway and disappearing around the bend, leaving behind a faint trace of exhaust mingling with the salty air. I stood there for a long moment, watching until the car was gone, a strange calm settling over me. Not because I was giving up, far from it, but because I knew the real game was only beginning. They still believed I was the obedient daughter from years ago, the one who would surrender her own rights to keep the family at peace. This time, they were wrong. Inside the house, I poured myself a cup of tea, settled into the armchair by the window, and opened my laptop. I sent Daniel a brief message. They came exactly as expected. Prepare for the next step. 2 days after their so-called confident announcement, the morning in the coastal town began, beneath a thin layer of mist mixed with the scent of the sea. I had woken early, not to clean or cook, but to prepare for the moment I knew was coming. The living room table was cleared, holding only thick blue-bound files, stamped with the name of the trust, their pages neatly organized and tabbed. Outside on the wooden porch, I placed an extra chair for my guest, Mr. Mark Harris, a representative from the County Property Records Office. As the clock edged closer to 10, the low rumble of an engine echoed from the far end of the gravel road, each rotation of the tires sounding like a countdown. A white moving truck rolled forward, led by the familiar black SUV that belonged to my parents. Ashley was the first to jump out of the passenger seat, dressed in a designer tracksuit, her hair pulled high, phone already in hand, as if she were prepared to record her moment of victory. My father climbed out from behind the wheel, his smile split between reassurance and an assertion of control. My mother followed quickly, pointing toward the porch and motioning for the two movers to start unloading their dollies from the truck. Their footsteps crunched across the gravel, laughter mixing with the sound, completely convinced the situation was already resolved. But the moment they stepped onto the walkway, the scene in front of them stopped them cold. I stood there with my arms folded across my chest beside Mr. Mark Harris, dressed in a sharply tailored navy suit and striped tie, his silver-streaked hair neatly combed back. In his hands was a thick file, the cover clearly marked with the trust's name, clipped together with documents stamped in bold red seals. He didn't speak right away, waiting until they moved a few steps closer. When the distance narrowed to just a few meters, he reached into his breast pocket and produced his official ID, holding it up just long enough for them to see. "Am I speaking with Mr. Richard Carter, Mrs. Linda Carter, and Miss Ashley Carter?" His voice was clear, deep, and deliberate. The three of them exchanged glances, confusion flickering across their faces at his question. My father nodded, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Yes. What is this about?" Mark glanced down at the file, then looked back up. "I'm here on behalf of the County Office of Property Records to inform you of the legal status of this property. According to our records, this house was placed into an irrevocable trust on April 12th of last year, with Miss Emily Carter as the sole trustee. That means any transfer of ownership attempted after that date, including the documents currently in your possession, is legally void and constitutes fraud." The words fell heavily into the silence. Ashley's smile disappeared first, replaced by a rapid blink as she searched for a response. My mother's grip tightened around the papers, her lips pressing into a thin line, while my father stepped forward half a pace, his voice sharp. "Fraud? What fraud? We just corrected an error in the will. Your grandparents forgot." Mr. Mark interrupted calmly but firmly. "Sir, any correction or amendment made without legal authorization from the trustee and without going through the county's formal process is null and void. Additionally, our records show that you used an out-of-state service to generate these transfer documents, along with a notary seal not licensed in Oregon. That alone is sufficient to initiate a criminal investigation if necessary." I remained silent, watching their reactions unfold. The two movers standing near the porch exchanged uneasy looks. One cleared his throat softly, then slowly backed away toward the truck. Ashley swallowed hard, trying to steady her voice. "What are you doing, Emily? We're family." I turned to face her, my voice low and controlled. Family doesn't show up with forged documents to force me out of the house my grandparents trusted me to protect. Family doesn't hire movers to clear out my belongings without my consent. Mr. Mark continued, his tone still even, each word deliberate. I will be filing an official report of today's events along with a formal warning. If you return here with any further intent to take possession of this property, we will proceed to the next stage, including contacting law enforcement and the district attorney's office to open a case. He handed my father a copy of the notice, then turned to me. Miss Carter, all management and control rights to this property remain fully with the trust under your authority. My parents and Ashley lingered for a few moments longer, as if hoping I might reconsider. When they saw only my calm, unwavering gaze, my father turned sharply, his voice clipped. Let's go. Ashley shot me a glare and spat, You'll regret this. I answered with nothing more than the faintest smile, sharp enough to unsettle them more than any argument ever could. By then, the movers were nearly jogging back to the truck, packing their equipment far faster than they had unloaded it. When the SUV and the moving truck finally rolled away, leaving the gravel driveway silent once more, I let out a slow breath. Mr. Mark closed the file, handed me a copy, and said, They'll try again, but today you showed them it won't be easy. I nodded my thanks, walked him to his car, and then stood alone on the porch, staring out at the ocean. The waves continued their steady rhythm, as if no one had attempted to disrupt the calm of this house at all. But I knew this was only the opening move, and I would need to be ready for whatever came next. 3 days after the confrontation on the porch, with Mr. Mark Harris as a witness, I returned to Seattle and tried to refocus on my normal work routine. That Wednesday afternoon, as I stepped into my apartment, I noticed a yellow envelope placed neatly by the door. The corner displayed the name of a law firm in Portland, and the neatly typed line addressed to Emily Carter told me exactly what I was about to read. Inside was a 4-page letter printed on heavy paper in a formal serif font titled, Formal Demand for Settlement. The sender was my mother's attorney. I sat down at the kitchen table and read every line. In the opening paragraph, they claimed my mother was acting in the best interests of the family and accused me of violating my moral and emotional obligations by refusing to share my grandparents' estate. Then came the demands, $150,000 in cash as compensation for my mother's emotional distress, joint ownership of the seaside house with Ashley, and a monthly stipend, effective immediately, to support the family's long-term well-being. They argued that my decision to keep the entire estate had caused severe emotional strain and irreparable damage to the bonds between mother and daughter, and between sisters. By the time I finished reading, I felt an equal mix of amusement and exhaustion. Instead of reacting on impulse, I picked up my phone, opened my contacts, and selected the one person I knew could handle this properly. Sonia Patel, an estate and trust attorney Daniel had introduced me to while I was finalizing my grandparents' asset transfer. Sonia was in her early 40s, petite and soft-spoken, but every word she chose was as precise as a surgeon's scalpel. I scheduled a meeting for the next morning at her downtown Seattle office, bringing both the letter and a copy of the trust documents. The moment I sat across from her, Sonia opened the letter, skimmed it carefully, then looked up with a faint, knowing smile. Emily, they're playing legal intimidation games and they think you'll panic. When I asked what she wanted to do first, her response was immediate. We're going to send a cease and desist, demand that they stop all harassment, clearly state that their claims have no legal standing, and then we're going to investigate from the other direction. Within 2 days, Sonia had the letter drafted. Its tone was both courteous and unyielding, affirming the full legality of the irrevocable trust, stating that neither my mother nor Ashley had any valid legal claim, and warning that any further threats or harassment would result in direct legal action. The letter was sent via certified mail to both my mother's attorney and her home address in Oregon. But Sonia didn't stop there. Using Mr. Mark's file and the details I had provided, she traced the documents they had presented during the moving truck incident. She checked the notary stamp number and discovered it didn't exist in Oregon's notary database. Then, by reviewing the transaction registration code, She found the filing had been made through an out-of-state online property record service, one that several states had already flagged as a source of forged filings designed to bypass local verification, and the name listed as the filer was Ashley Carter. When Sonia said it out loud, I felt a surge of relief, followed immediately by a cold, sharp anger sliding straight down my spine.